So, Christmas. We all think we know the story, right? The carols, the tree, the whole vibe. But what if I told you that the cozy, familiar holiday we celebrate today has a history that is way stranger, much wilder, and a whole lot more complicated than you probably imagine? Okay, let's get into it.
To get to the bottom of this, we've got to go way back. I'm talking long before the first Christmas tree was ever a thing. We're heading to a world that was, well, pretty pagan, where winter was a time for some seriously wild feasts and some pretty peculiar rituals.
Okay, check this out. This quote is wild because it's not Christian at all. It's describing a pagan ceremony back in 4th century Alexandria. Picture this. Worshippers spend the entire night in a temple singing to Kore, the maiden goddess. Then, right at dawn, they bring this wooden idol up from an underground chamber and announce that the maiden has given birth to the Aeon, which basically means the new age. A virgin birth, celebrated in the dead of winter. The parallels are pretty striking, aren't they?
And that really sets the stage for this huge challenge that the early Christian church was facing. What in the world were they supposed to do with these incredibly popular, deeply rooted pagan winter festivals?
And look, this wasn't just some abstract theological problem. You had church leaders like St. Boniface who were actually actively complaining that even in the heart of Rome, people were still running around the streets on New Year's Eve, singing what he called impious songs and shouting heathen cries. Just telling people, stop doing that, was not working at all. So this is where the church comes up with a truly brilliant and honestly super pragmatic strategy laid out by Pope Gregory the Great. His whole approach was basically, if you can't beat them, absorb them. He told his abbots, look, don't destroy their traditions. Instead, let's co-opt them. Let's take that energy and just give it a new Christian meaning. In other words, don't ban the party, just change who the party's for. In this slide, it shows that strategy in action perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the Roman Calends, a pagan festival that was all about costumes, feasting, and basically turning all the normal social rules completely upside down. And on the right, its Christian successor, the Feast of Fools. This is where the junior clergy would literally take over the church for a day, sing rowdy songs, and even elect a bishop of fools. The wild, chaotic energy is exactly the same. It's just been brought inside the church walls and given a new name.
So this whole strategy of adaptation, it didn't just stop with the big festivals. Nope, it also started shaping other traditions that we might actually recognize today, especially the ones that involve dressing up and going from house to house.
Right, so this absorption of folk culture, it leads directly to the rise of these Christmas folk plays. But here's the thing, these weren't always the super serious, solemn performances you might be picturing. A lot of them were actually really down to earth and, well, funny. You'd have actors playing shepherds who are complaining on stage about how freezing cold it is, or making jokes about some other guy's long beard. It just goes to show how religion and regular everyday life were so tangled up that people felt totally comfortable having a laugh with it. These folk plays often took the form of something called mumming. And what that was basically troops of costumed performers who would travel from house to house, putting on their little show in exchange for some food or drink or maybe some money. This is a pretty clear Christianized version of those older pagan processions, and believe it or not, it's the direct ancestor of modern-day Christmas carolers. But the characters in these plays, oh man, they were wonderfully bizarre. You had the fool who'd be dressed in animal skins. You had a character named Bessie, who was always, and I mean always, a man dressed as a woman. And then you had these creatures like Old Hob, which was a hobby horse made from an actual horse's skull mounted on a pole. The German version sometimes even had glowing coals for eyes. These aren't just random scary costumes, you guys. They are direct echoes of the animal masks and the cross-dressing that the church tried so hard to get rid of centuries earlier. The old ways just kept finding a way back in.
So after all this, what did this incredible, centuries-long mashup of pagan partying and Christian prayer actually create? What is the real spirit of the holiday that came out of all this?
The result was something totally new, something historians have called the carol spirit. And it's this unique blend, you know? It's that earthy human joy, that loud, chaotic, fun energy from the pagan world, fused together with the sacred story of the Nativity. It's holy and human, solemn and silly, all at the exact same time. So when you really think about it, the Christmas we celebrate isn't one single, pure tradition. It's this rich, messy, beautiful tapestry that's woven from threads of ancient sun worship, Roman street parties, and these wonderfully bizarre folk creatures. And it was all stitched together by a church that was wise enough to adapt instead of just destroy.
And that right there is what gives the holiday its deep, its layered, and its lasting power. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? If this is the story hiding behind Christmas, what other secret histories are just waiting to be discovered in our other favorite holidays?
Hello and welcome. For the next few minutes, let's you and I become Christmas archaeologists. We're gonna grab our shovels and brushes and dig down, way down through the centuries. We're going right past the familiar tinsel and wrapping paper to unearth the surprising and, honestly, sometimes downright strange origins of our most cherished holiday traditions. And our dig starts with one single, intriguing question.
Think about it. You hang holly on the door, you sing God Rescue Merry Gentlemen, but have you ever really stopped to ask why? Well, it turns out the answer connects us to a whole world of forest spirits, ancient sacrificial rites, and a really fascinating battle for the very soul of the holiday.
So for our first excavation, we're going to dig into the soundtrack of Christmas. We'll start by listening really closely to the music, from those formal hymns of the early church to the rustic songs of the common folk.
Okay, so on one hand, you had the official music of the church. These early Latin hymns were, well, they were stately, severe, and written in these complex classical meters. Beautiful, for sure, but also very formal. But out in the villages, something totally different was bubbling up. The folk carol. These were the songs of the people, simple, full of emotion, and meant to be sung out in the streets, not just quietly in the pews.
You can just feel the spirit of these early carols in a song like this one from 15th century England. It's about a shepherd boy named Wat. And get this, his gift to the infant Jesus isn't gold or myrrh, it's his pipe, his tar box, and his homemade skirt. It's earthy, it's real, it just perfectly captures that popular, from-the-heart feeling.
But that brings up a good question. Where did this whole tradition of going door to door even come from? Well, here's our first major archaeological find. It looks like the act of carol singing is actually a Christianized version of a much older custom. We're talking pre-Christian processions, where bands of people would go from house to house, bringing good fortune and, hoping for a gift in return. The tune changed, but the practice? It stayed.
All right, now we're digging into the next layer. We're shifting from the sounds to the sights of the season. We're about to uncover the pagan symbolism that's been hiding in plain sight in our Christmas decorations all along.
So the Yule log, it's not just about putting a big piece of wood on the fire to stay warm. Not at all. This ancient Slavic ritual, the badniak, was a powerful ceremony. Bringing that oak log into the house was a sacred act. The corn and wine sprinkled on it, those weren't just for show. They were offerings, a way to honor ancestral spirits and to basically guarantee a good harvest in the year to come.
And that exact same idea applies to all the greenery we bring inside. The holly, the ivy, the mistletoe. The original reason for bringing them in wasn't just to make the house look pretty. I mean, think about it. In the dead of winter, these evergreens were these powerful symbols of life. Bringing them indoors was a way to literally make contact with the vegetation spirit they represented, inviting its life-giving force right into your home for protection and good luck.
Okay, now we're digging deep. We're going into the oldest, strangest, and most overtly pagan layer of our Christmas traditions. So brace yourselves, because this is where we uncover the bizarre world of animal masks, wild folk plays, and the unmistakable echoes of ancient sacrifice.
As we dig deeper, we unearth incredible images like this one. These are New Year mummers in Manchuria, but this tradition of dressing up in animal skins and masks is a global thing, and it was once all over Europe during the winter festivals. This was not just a party costume. It was a powerful, transformative ritual.
And here, you can see its European cousins, customs that are believed to be the last surviving relics of ancient animal sacrifice. I mean, just imagine Old Hob in England, a real horse's head being carried from door to door, or the terrifying German Schimmel, a figure with glowing coals for eyes. In some towns, you'd literally be chased by the snapping jaws of the Hodening horse. These figures brought this chaotic, primal energy to the season, a direct link to a pre-Christian world. This all comes together in something called the Mummers' Play. It was performed in villages for centuries, and its core plot is always the same. A hero is struck down in a ritual battle, only to be miraculously brought back to life by a doctor. See what's happening? It's the cycle of death and rebirth, the very soul of the winter solstice, played out right in front of you. And notice the key characters. The fool in an animal skin and Bessie, a man dressed as a woman, the exact figures the early church couldn't stand. And that brings us to the central conflict in our story. For centuries, a battle raged for the heart of the holiday. On one side, you had this deeply ingrained pagan revelry of the people. and on the other, the official doctrine of the Christian Church.
And the divide could not have been more clear. Early church fathers fought tooth and nail, writing these furious condemnations against these very practices: the animal masks, the cross-dressing, the rowdy New Year's celebrations. But for the average person, these weren't evil acts. They were just the way things had always been done. They were ancestral traditions that marked the turning of the year. So how did this conflict finally get resolved? Well, this right here is the smoking gun of our entire investigation. This letter from Pope Gregory the Great in 601 AD reveals a massive shift in strategy. He basically realized you can't just ban these customs that are so deeply rooted in people's lives. So instead of eradication, the new policy became assimilation. The result was a brilliant strategic compromise. The church started absorbing these pagan traditions, just giving them a new Christian meaning. Animal sacrifices were replaced with feasts on saints' days. Those heathen processions, they became carol singing. This made the new Christian holidays incredibly popular, but it also ensured that the DNA of these ancient rites survived, hidden just beneath the surface.
But this tension never fully went away. 1,000 years later, the Puritans in England launched another attack on Christmas. They saw the masking and mumming for exactly what it was, a pagan survival, and they tried to stamp it out for good, even turning Christmas into a day of fasting by law. But the public pushed back, and it even led to riots. The battle for Christmas was still being fought.
So, our archaeological dig is coming to a close. We've brushed the dust off our familiar holiday, and we've unearthed a story that's so much richer and more complex than we ever might have imagined.
So let's just piece together everything we found. The sound of Christmas carols, it echoes ancient door-to-door processions. The sight of all that festive greenery is a direct link to rituals meant to harness the power of nature spirits. Those strange rituals of mummers and folk plays are the last vestiges of sacrificial rites. And the reason all this coexists is because the holiday as we know it was born from a historic compromise.
Christmas isn't just one single story. It's a living tapestry woven from countless threads of history, belief, and tradition. So the final question really is for you. As you celebrate this year, what are you going to see differently? When you hear a carol, will you also hear the footsteps of ancient processions? When you hang the holly, will you feel the presence of that vegetation spirit? What hidden histories will you now see?
All right, let's get into it. The Great Christmas War. You heard me right. Today, we're unwrapping the secret history of Christmas. And you can forget peace on earth for a minute, because we're telling the story of a great big war.
What if I told you that the most wonderful time of the year is also the most warlike? Seriously, think about it. Every single carol you sing, every decoration you hang up, it's basically a relic, a fossil from a long-forgotten conflict.
Yeah, see, underneath all that tinsel and those cheerful carols, there's a forgotten battlefield. This is where ancient spirits and a brand new faith clashed for centuries. I'm talking hundreds of years where midwinter was a total war zone. You had the wild, chaotic, super deep-rooted traditions of pagan Europe on one side, and on the other, the disciplined, organized force of the early Christian church.
And that is the story of the war we're gonna tell today, and how it literally created the holiday we all know. So here's how I want you to think about this. We're on an archaeological dig. We're gonna excavate the layers of modern Christmas and find the ancient foundations hidden just below.
Our dig, it starts in ancient Rome. This is where we uncover that first foundational layer of our modern holiday. Because let's be real, the spirit of Christmas revelry, it didn't start in Bethlehem. Nope, it started with a massive party at what felt like the end of the world.
So check this out. During the Roman festivals of the Calends and Saturnalia, they deliberately turned the entire world upside down. I mean, all business was forbidden. All men were equal, slave and free. Slaves were literally served by their masters. The only rule was to be witty and lusty. Guys dressed as women, wore animal heads. It was chaos. And this idea that midwinter is a time for total misrule, for just letting loose, that is the absolute bedrock of the modern Christmas party.
Okay, so now we leave the cities of Rome and we travel north. We're heading into the dark, snow-covered forests of pagan Germany and Scandinavia. And let me tell you, up here, the festive spirit, it was a whole lot darker. You know, the 12 days of Christmas were once the most dangerous time of the year. So forget about partridges and pear trees. The original 12 days were a time of deep, deep anxiety. The sun was at its weakest, the nights were longer than ever, and that veil between our world and the spirit world, it was terrifyingly thin. This was a time when monsters literally walked the earth. And these weren't just vague shadows. Oh no, they had names. Let me introduce you to the Kalakanseroi, some of the most feared creatures in the entire Christmas bestiary.
And just look at what these things were. They'd come out from dark, dank places at night. They had monkey's arms, long curved nails, the foot of a beast. It's so specific, right? They weren't just some vague bogeymen. They were the personification of real midwinter terrors. Starvation, they'd eat your Christmas pork. Contamination, they'd foul all your water. And just the sheer darkness beyond the firelight. They would swarm down your chimney, ruin all your food, and yeah, they would absolutely rend and crush anyone who crossed their path.
And here's the kicker. It wasn't just spirits running around. People actively participated in all this chaos. I mean, all across the ancient world, from the hodening horse skulls in England to these New Year mummers way over in Manchuria, people would put on animal masks and skins. They were deliberately blurring the line between human and beast, between civilization and the wild.
So, you might be wondering, how did people fight back against all this darkness? Well, you know the Yule log, right? That thing is a fossil. It's a fossil of a powerful pagan ritual with a sacred oak log called the Bodnyak. It wasn't just for keeping warm. This was a full-on magical rite. The father of the house would bring it in, sprinkle corn and wine on it while it burned, and pray for the fortunes of his family and farm. By burning this log and making offerings, they hoped to secure light, life, and prosperity for the whole next year. Okay, so the church strikes back. They're facing this on two fronts. You've got these incredibly powerful, deep-rooted traditions, the wild parties of Rome on one hand, and the terrifying spirits of the north on the other. The early church had a choice. Do we fight it or do we adapt? Well, they decided to do both, and they launched a campaign that would last for centuries to conquer the winter season.
And this right here, this letter from Pope Gregory the Great in 601 AD is basically the smoking gun. It reveals the church's absolutely brilliant strategy. He writes, essentially, look, these people love to sacrifice oxen to demons, so let's just put our own solemnity in its place, let them have their feast, let them build their huts, just do it for us now. Instead of banning the feasts, which they knew was impossible, he told his missionaries to just co-opt them. You can have your bonfire, you can have your party, just dedicate it to a Christian saint instead of a pagan god. It was a genius strategy of absorption.
But this strategy of absorption kind of worked a little too well. For centuries, Christmas just stayed this rowdy, drunken, pagan-infused festival of misrule, and that opened up a whole new front in the war, this time inside Christianity itself. You had reformers like the Puritans who were absolutely horrified. As this writer Philip Stubbs put it in 1583, Christmas was just cards, dice, masking, mumming, and such-like fooleries. They thought people had a commission to do whatever they wanted. The Puritans saw it as a pagan holiday in a Christian costume, and they tried to ban it completely.
So you see, suppression and compromise, they just weren't enough to truly win the war for winter. To really do that, the church needed a new idea. A story so powerful, so personal, that it could capture the hearts and minds of everyone. And they found it. They found it in the cradle at Bethlehem.
I'm telling you, this was a full-blown revolution in religious feeling. The old spirit, the early monastic way, was all about renunciation. God was a figure of judgment and awe. The hymns were formal and Latin. The joy was, well, austere. But this new carol spirit, championed by followers of St. Francis, it was completely different. It was about Franciscan humanism, a God who becomes a vulnerable baby. The carols were rustic and heartfelt. It was all about love, tenderness, and mirth. They didn't focus on God the judge anymore. They focused on God the helpless baby, a figure you could actually love and connect with on a deep human level.
There's this beautiful Italian phrase that really captures the whole idea. Dio facto piccino. It means God made a little thing. Just think about that. Suddenly, the infinite was contained in something finite and small. God wasn't some distant king up in heaven anymore. He was a sweet little brother, a bambolino, shivering in a manger. This was a God you could finally approach.
And of course, art followed right along. The focus in paintings like this, the adoration of the shepherds, it shifted to the raw, physical, human details of the Nativity. You see the poverty, the animals. You can almost feel the cold. You see the simple wonder on the faces of working folk as they encounter the divine. This carol spirit, it didn't condemn the physical world, it found God inside of it.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the present day. Let's look for the fossils among us, reading the modern landscape. Because once you know what to look for, I promise you will see the echoes of this ancient war and the fossils of these old rites everywhere in our modern Christmas.
Let's trace it. The pagan Bodnyak ritual, and that becomes the Yule log on the hearth. The terrifying Hottening horse, that masked beast man, he gets tamed into the kind of silly hobby horse in a mummer's play. And even these really strange folk games, like the Smoking of the Fool at Haxey in England. It's a living fossil. It's an echo of ancient sacrificial rites that have totally lost their original meaning, but have somehow kept their form.
And this right here is the ultimate outcome of the Christmas War. Christmas became the great festival of the natural body. That carol spirit, it won. But it didn't win by destroying the pagan love of the physical world. It won by absorbing it and just giving it a new name.
Think about what that means. The final victory of Christmas was to take everything that paganism celebrated and just declare it holy. Affection, camaraderie, merrymaking, feasting, the warmth of the fire, the green of the earth in the middle of winter, it hallowed all the ordinary yet profound joys of just being human in a dark and cold world.
So this year, when you gather with your family and friends, are you celebrating a quiet, holy night? Or are you actually celebrating the triumphant end of a 2,000-year war? As you light that fire, just ask yourself, am I just celebrating a holiday, or am I taking part in the peace treaty that ended a war between gods and monsters, a conflict that reshaped our entire world?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on, well, a pretty monumental journey. We're going to be tracing the emotional and the cultural DNA of Christmas itself.
And we're going way beyond, the usual stuff, the twinkling lights, the shopping rush.
Right. We're delving deep into the layers of history, all the traditions woven together that make the festival what it is.
Our sources for this are just incredible. They're ancient, they're vast. We're pulling from 4th century Latin hymns, medieval folktales, wild dramatic plays.
And even records from the early church, which was, it seems, constantly trying and often failing to control this wild spirit of the European winter.
Exactly.
So our mission for you is to really unpack how Christmas transformed. It started as this very formal, solemn religious thing.
All focused on metaphysical mystery, very high concept.
And then, over 1,000 years, it just morphed. It became intensely human, joyous, and sometimes, shockingly profane. We want to get into that emotional journey.
It's really a story of two festivals, isn't it? There's the one that the theologians came up with, and then there's the one that people on the ground actually demanded.
Okay, so let's unpack that, starting right at the very beginning. Rome, middle of the 4th century. The first reaction to the Nativity story, it wasn't warm and fuzzy at all. It was intensely theological.
Precisely. You have to start with the sheer intellectual weight of it all. The early celebration wasn't about the human details, the cold stable, the straw, the animals, none of that. It was about the mystery of the incarnation.
God becoming man.
And to really get a feel for this, we have to look at the earliest known Latin hymn we have for the feast. It's called Veni, Redemptor Gentium, and it was written by Ambrose, the Archbishop of Milan. He died in 397.
Ambrose was a giant of the early church. And this hymn, it really feels more like a theological monument than, say, a Christmas carol. You can just feel the gravity of it, even in the little fragments of Latin that survive.
The language is all about divine pedigree. It's about the mind-bending reality of God stepping into time. You mentioned those fragments like ostende partem virginis, verbum de factum caro.
Which translates to what exactly?
Show forth the virgin's birth, the word of God made flesh. See, the focus is entirely on the metaphysical event. God, the divine intellect, the logos taking on the limits of a human body.
It's majestic and serious, but also completely unsentimental.
It is, and another line drives that home. Non ex virili semine, said mystico spiramine. Not from the seed of man, but by the mystical breath.
So there's no room in this for Mary's exhaustion or Joseph's anxiety. It's all about the celestial mechanics of it.
It's a very high theological ceiling. It keeps the human messiness of the whole thing at a very formal, very safe distance.
And that really sets the emotional tone for Christmas in the West for centuries. It's all about solemnity and awe. It's hard to imagine any kind of, popular joy breaking through that.
It was a very distant relationship with the divine. But what's so fascinating is that our sources show this little hint, an anticipation of the tenderness to come, but it was happening in isolation way over on the other side of the world.
In the Eastern Church.
Yeah.
You're talking about Ephraim Syrus, the 4th century poet.
Exactly. He's the exception that proves the rule. He was already looking at the human side of it, centuries before the West caught up.
So he was already doing what the sources call the Franciscan treatment of the Nativity.
He wasn't focused on the solemn Latin mystery. He was looking at the infant, the babe. in the humility of that stable in Bethlehem. But his perspective, for whatever reason, it just didn't cross that cultural chasm to the west for almost 900 years.
That 9-century gap, that's incredible. That's the journey we're tracing. And that brings us to the huge shift, the humanizing revolution of the 13th century.
And to really appreciate how seismic this change was, you have to understand what the emotional landscape was like before it happened. Religious song, like from the German Minnesingers, was very pious, but also very reserved.
Right. When they sang about the Virgin Mary, she wasn't a young mother in a stable.
No, she was always the majestic queen of heaven. Enthroned, holding the divine child in glory, she was this untouchable, regal figure way above all human suffering.
So you had this separation. The religious world was all about distance and glory. And then the secular world, the troubadour songs, that was all about earthly, often illicit, courtly love.
The divine was distant and the human was profane. That was the setup. And the person who comes along and just smashes that divide, who changes Western Christianity forever, is St. Francis of Assisi.
St. Francis, he died in 1226. He wasn't just a religious reformer. He was a cultural revolutionary.
Oh, absolutely. He was the spark that kindled a mighty flame. Franciscanism was all about the radical democratizing and humanizing of Christianity. It just fundamentally changed how people related to Christ.
He was no longer just the distant divine savior or the mystic's bridegroom of the soul. He became something much more personal.
The source puts it perfectly. He becomes the little brother of all mankind.
And that one phrase, it captures this whole new injection of human joy into religion.
And that joy came directly from Francis's own nature. He was intensely artistic, intensely imaginative. He was maybe the first person in the West to really grasp the full poetry of Christmas.
And what was that poetry? It was the core paradox of it all, but without the theological jargon.
It was infinity coming into the most extreme limitation. The idea that the king of all kings, the ruler of the universe, would choose to become a poor, helpless baby. For Francis, that didn't just demand awe, it demanded tenderness, it demanded empathy.
And that recognition led directly to something we all know today, the physical thing. The nativity scene.
The Presepio, yes. The creation of the Presepio is widely credited to St. Francis, and our sources have this incredible, detailed account from Thomas of Solano about what happened at Christmas in Greccio in 1224.
Francis wanted to go beyond just symbolism, right? He wanted a bodily experience of the poverty of it all.
He did. He specifically asked a nobleman to prepare a memorial of the child's infant hardships. He said he wanted to behold with bodily eyes how Christ lay in the manger. And this wasn't going to be a static display of little figures.
No, he insisted on having a real ox and a real ass.
That detail about the animals is so key. It wasn't about a pretty picture of the Holy Family. It was about the immediate physical reality of the stable. It was meant to exalt poverty and simplicity.
So what was it like? What did Solano describe?
He describes a true spectacle. The brethren came from all over, the townspeople arrived carrying torches and tapers, and the night was lit up as bright as day. The whole woodland was ringing with voices, and Francis just stood there before the manger, completely overcome with tenderness and wondrous joy.
So that one Christmas Eve in Greccio, it basically cements the humble physical reality of the Incarnation into the popular imagination for good.
It really provides the emotional bedrock for everything that comes next, the poetry, the plays, the carols. And the first great voice to carry this new human joy into poetry was Jacopone da Torri.
Jacopo da Torri died in 1306. A Franciscan, the minstrel of the Lord. The sources, his own contemporaries, thought he was a bit mad.
They did, but it gives him a much more flattering description. Mad as the lark. Canta a tutta gola. He sings at the top of his throat, completely unconstrained. That is the spirit of this new, untamed, popular joy.
And it's so fascinating that this man, this ecstatic, joyful figure, is also the one credited with writing one of the most solemn, sorrowful hymns ever, the Stabat Mater Dolorosa.
The sorrowful mother stood. Yeah, his emotional range was just immense. But it's the joyous counterpart to that hymn that really captures the Franciscan Christmas spirit. He wrote the Stabat Mater Speciosa.
The full of beauty stood the mother.
And right there, you see the Virgin Mary transformed. She's no longer the distant queen of heaven. She's back to being a joyful human mother.
There's that fragment of the verse in the source.
Yes. She is standing, juxta fonum godiosa, dum yascibat parvulus, joyful beside the hay, while the little one lay there. That image is the polar opposite of the solemn metaphysical distance Ambrose set up 900 years earlier. It's immediate, it's tender, and it's just deeply, simply happy.
So this humanizing of Christ and Mary, it just opens the floodgates for all these vernacular poems and local traditions to just flourish all over Europe.
It does. Let's look at how different cultures sort of filtered this new tenderness, starting with Germany.
Okay, so the German movement in the 14th century, this was led by Dominicans like Meister Eckhart and Henry Suso. They were focused on a kind of inward piety.
That's right. While the Franciscans were focused on this external humility, the German mystics were all about the subjective, the personal, the inner experience.
And you can really see that interior focus in their carols. They have this warm, rustic, and very homely feel to them, like the carol. Es ist ein Ros entsprungen.
A rose has sprung up. It dates to the 14th century, and it's one of those rare ones that's still sung by both Catholics and Protestants today.
The German specialty seems to be domesticity. They didn't just bring the child into the stable, they brought him into their own homes.
They did. They show this deep sympathy by comparing the divine infant to their own children. We have this wonderful quote. "The child is laid in the crib so hardy and so rare. My little Hans would be nothing by his side were he finer than he is."
Wait, they're actually comparing the baby Jesus to their own son, Hans. That is such a perfect illustration of this whole democratizing effect. The King of Kings is now relatable to a normal German kid.
He's found to be superior, of course, but he's been brought right into their family world. Later on, you get the Reformation, which brings in these more forceful, muscular hymns from people like Martin Luther. Vom Himmelhoch is a great example.
Right, those are very direct, very strong hymns. But then in the 17th century, you have Paul Gerhardt, whose hymns are more subjective, more musical. A lot of people will know them from Bach's Christmas Oratorio.
Gerhardt is interesting because he manages to blend that Protestant dignity with this profound joy, but he still has this really keen, almost protective sympathy for the child. It's devotional, but it's still tender.
Okay, let's hop across the channel to England. There, the focus of the medieval carols seems to be on redemption, specifically turning sorrow to game.
The English carols, especially from the 15th century, were all about the result of the Nativity, which was salvation. It wasn't just about the baby. It was about the baby liberating humanity from the fall. The theology becomes the justification for the party.
The source has that one passage that just lays it all out.
Jesus is that child's name, Maiden Mater is his dame, and so our sorrow is turned to game.
Our sorrow is turned to game. It's the perfect medieval excuse for having a good time. The fall brought sorrow, Christ's birth turns that sorrow into a game, into joy, into a celebration.
It gives them license to fully embrace the festive spirit.
Now, the French tradition, that takes a very different turn, more towards realism, maybe a bit of formalism. It's described as dramatically, very humanly conceived.
Yeah, the French were heavily influenced by the Italian style, especially their love of diminutives. So they sing about the petit hostello, the little hostel or nole, which means a little Noel. And this focus on small human details leads to these incredibly realistic scenes.
Like the famous drama of refusal. This is where Joseph and Mary are just weary travelers and they're being turned away by an innkeeper.
It brings the harsh reality of poverty right into the sacred story. The dialogue is raw. In one example, Joseph is begging the hostess of the Red Rose for just a little spot for little folk, and she is just completely dismissive.
What did she say?
She says, "Vous n'avez pas la mine d'avoir de grands trésors, car quant à moi je dors." You don't look like you have great treasures. And as for me, I'm sleeping.
Wow. As for me, I'm sleeping. That is just so cutting. It's the sound of the world just shutting the door. It completely strips away the gilded, holy image and replaces it with cold, hard fatigue and rejection.
That intense human realism is the genius of the French approach. But if we're talking about sheer, audacious imagination, we have to talk about their other great contribution.
Talking animals.
The talking animals, this bizarre little dialogue where the animals themselves comment on the Nativity, and they're speaking Latin and French.
It's so strange. The sacred event is being narrated by farm animals.
It grounds the whole thing in the stable, but through this lens of pure theatrical comedy. The source gives this wonderful example. The cock, the bird that announces the dawn, cries out, "Christus natus est," Christ is born.
And the other animals all chime in. The ox asks, "Ubi, ubi, ubi, where?
The goat replies that it's a Bethlehem. Then the ass, eager to go, says, "Emus, let us go." And finally, the calf just bellows with pure childish excitement. "Volo, volo, I want to.
It's absurd, but also kind of beautiful. It's like the story belongs to the entire created world, right down to the livestock.
That blend of high and low is exactly what this revolution allowed. And then finally, we have the Italian cradle songs, which bring the focus back to pure intimacy.
The lullabies.
The Italian tradition is just exquisite in how it focuses on that mother-child bond. There's one particularly lovely Latin cradle song. We don't know who wrote it, but it's just pure, universal devotion.
And the translated bit really captures the mother's immediate practical worries for her baby, even though that baby is, the king of heaven.
She's comforting him, asking these very human questions. Why dost weep, my babe? Alas, cold winds that pass vex, or isn't the little ass? Lullaby, O paradise, of my heart thou savior art.
She's worried about the cold wind or the donkey being too close.
The king of heaven is brought right down to the level of a shivering baby. And that is the absolute essence of this humanizing revolution. And that tenderness, it naturally laid the groundwork for actually performing the Nativity story on a stage.
Right, which sets us up perfectly for the explosion of Christmas drama. This is where the human, the sacred, and the very profane all just collide in the town square.
It's a huge new phase. We go from those really restrictive liturgical plays to the soaring, audacious vernacular mystery plays that were just a mirror of popular life.
The early stuff, like the Office of the Shepherds from the 11th or 13th century, that was all in Latin, right? Performed inside the church.
Yes, very solemn, oppressive, hieratic. They were basically extensions of the Mass, designed to create awe. But once the drama moved out of the cathedral and into the marketplace, everything changed.
It became a reflection of real life. And this gets to that amazing paradox of the Middle Ages. That religion was so real, so immediate, that people could actually laugh at it without for a second stopping to believe in it.
The realism was so intense that even the Christ child could be shown as being happy with simple human things like a bob of cherries or a ball. The divine was no longer untouchable, it was part of the neighborhood.
And nowhere is that blend of devotion and just raw humor better than in the Ingle shepherd scenes, especially in the Towneley cycle. The playwrights didn't have much theology to work with for the shepherds, so they had to get creative.
And they created this magnificent comedy. They used the lowest kind of human farce to set up the highest religious experience. The second shepherd play is the classic example. It doesn't start with a prayer. It starts with the shepherds complaining.
About what?
About everything. The weather, being hungry, and most of all, about their Lordfest bosses who are making their lives miserable. The dialogue is rough, it's full of social gripes, it's racy, it's a very earthy opening.
And then the main comic plot kicks in with Mac, the neighborhood thief.
The others are suspicious of him, so they make him sleep between them so he can't steal anything. But of course, Mac still manages to steal a sheep.
And his plan to hide it is just brilliant comedy. His wife, Gil, wraps the stolen sheep in swaddling clothes and puts it in a cradle, pretending it's their newborn baby. Mac even sings a lullaby to the bleeding sheep baby.
The discovery scene is the absolute peak of the farce. The shepherds come looking, they search the house, but they don't find anything. But being good country folk, they decide they should leave a little gift for the newborn.
Oh, this is where it all goes wrong for Mac.
It is. One of the shepherds lifts the cloth, expecting to see a baby, and just yells out in shock, "What the devil is this? He has a long snout!"
A long snout. And Mac's wife, Gil, has to come up with an excuse on the spot.
A truly desperate one. She claims the baby was taken by an elf, and was force-shapen, or misshapen, when the clock struck 12. The excuse for the sheep baby is folklore. An elf did it.
And their punishment for Mac is just as rough and ready. They give him a good tossing in a blanket. But what's so powerful is what happens the second the tossing stops.
The comedy just stops. Dead. The sheer earthiness of the sheep-stealing plot is immediately followed by the arrival of the angel, announcing the Nativity. And the devotion that follows feels so real, so human, naive, and touching, because it just came out of this ridiculous, narrow human situation.
So they go from tossing a sheep thief to being in absolute awe of God's messenger.
Instantly. And the Star of Bethlehem appears, and they're just left in wonder. They even argue about what the angel actually sang.
They can't remember the words to the Gloria in Excelsis.
They're rough men trying to recall this celestial music. They debate if it was glare with a glee, or maybe glory with a glow. They're translating the divine into sounds that make sense to them.
And the gifts they bring to the infant are so wonderfully practical and humble, especially when you compare them to the gold, frankincense, and myrrh of the Magi.
Oh, well, completely. They bring these quaint, rustic things, a bell, a flask, a spoon for him to eat his porridge with. One of them, a servant named Trowel, brings a pair of his wife's old stockings. But the most touching one is the last gift.
The nut hook.
A nut hook, so the baby can pull down apples and plums for himself. and he gives it so that old Joseph shall not need to hurt his thumbs.
That's just a gift of genuine practical care for this little human baby.
It is. The comedy just paved the way for this incredibly profound piety. They leave just desperate to tell everyone what they've seen.
Now, the French drama was a bit different, a bit more spectacular, especially the whole medieval drama thing started to decline.
You see this amazing blend of the sacred and the fantastic. A 15th century French mystery play had heathen idols dramatically falling down, and then Hellmouth would open up.
Hellmouth.
Yeah, demons would make a hideous noise, fire would shoot out of its nostrils and eyes and ears, and then right after that, the angels would come and worship the child.
That must have been quite a show. And later on, classical figures even started creeping in, Orpheus and nymphs.
It just shows you what a mixing bowl European culture was. But whether it was a simple nut hook or a fire-breathing hellmouth, the spirit of performance had just permanently linked the sacred story to everyday human life.
So we've covered the emotional journey, the drama. Now we need to turn to the formal rites and the really enduring power of the folkloric, the pagan survivals that are just woven into the fabric of Christmas.
And we have to start with the liturgical center of it all, the tradition of the 3 Christmas masses.
Midnight, dawn, and full daylight. This was established in Rome, and the Midnight Mass in particular was, and still is, the most impressive Christmas service.
And this practice of a triple mass led to 2 main interpretations. The first one is pretty straightforward, it's just chronological.
Right. The Nativity happened at night, so you have Midnight Mass. The shepherds visited at dawn, so you have the Dawn Mass. And the Christian era began in the full light of day, so you have the Daylight Mass.
A nice, tidy, historical progression. But St. Thomas Aquinas came along and offered a much deeper, more mystical interpretation that just elevated the whole thing.
He saw the 3 masses as representing 3 different kinds of birth for Christ.
He did. The first, the Midnight Mass, stood for the dark mystery of the eternal generation of the Son, this deep philosophical idea of the Word being born from the Father before time even existed.
Right.
The second, the Dawn Mass, symbolized the birth of Christ, the morning star, inside the hearts of believers through grace. And the third, the Daylight Mass, represented the actual physical bodily birth of the Son of Mary. It's this incredible fusion of history, philosophy, and personal faith.
And the experience of going to Midnight Mass, it was designed to be this powerful sensory thing. The source has that amazing memory from Madame Trey Benson about walking to Mass in the French countryside.
Her account is brilliant. It just captures that atmosphere of reverence that only comes from darkness and cold. She describes being bundled up in furs and wooden shoes, carrying a lantern on this crisp white road. All these little groups from the farms and mills join them, forming this silent stream of lights.
The sensory contrast is key. No one spoke, she says, because the icy north wind cut short our breath. The only sound was the distant rhythmic chiming of the church bells.
And then the transition. You step out of that absolute cold and silence and darkness, and you walk into this packed church, blazing with candles, warm with people, and the whole congregation just erupts into a solemn chorale. It's an experience that physically takes you from the ordinary world into the sacred mystery.
Now, over in the East, the Greek church had a different focus. For them, Christmas wasn't as big a deal as Christ's baptism, which they celebrate on Epiphany.
That's a crucial difference. The main event for them is the Great Blessing, the blessing of the waters on Epiphany. And this involves these big, elaborate processions down to the sea or a river.
And the ceremony is pretty dramatic. The bishop throws a small wooden cross into the water and pulls it out, sprinkling the crowd.
He does it 3 times for the Trinity. But in some places, like Nauplia, it gets really competitive. The archbishop throws the cross into the harbor, and all these young fishermen dive in and fight for it.
And the winner gets more than just a blessing, right?
The winner gets the right to go around town and collect money, and it can be a pretty large sum. So the sacred rite has a very practical, very lucrative outcome.
The church says this represents Christ's baptism, but anthropologists have a different idea.
They see it as a Christianized version of a primitive rain charm, a bit of sympathetic magic. The idea is that by drenching everything in water, you're encouraging the rains to come and make the crops grow.
And that view is backed up by the Russian country belief about the priest blessing the waters. The peasants thought the procession was literally chasing away the old gods.
Forest demons, sprites, and fairies. The holy ceremony was seen as a ritual of purification and exorcism, clearing out the remnants of the old spiritual world.
And this idea that Christianity absorbed older practices brings us right to the Roman roots. The Saturnalia, and the calends. The church tried to stamp them out, but they were just too powerful.
These Roman winter festivals were foundational. Saturnalia and the calends of January or New Year's Day, they were all about universal partying, luxury, and this temporary reversal of the social order.
Yeah.
Total topsy-turvydom.
The 4th century writer Libanius paints this incredible picture of it. He talks about carousals and well-laden tables everywhere, even in the houses of the poor.
Everyone felt the impulse to spend, savers became extravagant, all work stopped, and crucially, slaves got to breathe the air of freedom. For a few days, the whole world was turned upside down.
But the customs that went along with this were seen as completely impious by the early church fathers.
Oh, they hated them. They condemned dressing up in animal skins and masks, the servulum, or beast masking wearing women's clothes, impious dancing. Saint Boniface in the 8th century was so frustrated because some of the German tribes refused to give these things up.
And the reason why is just amazing.
They said they had seen these exact same practices being performed in Rome, right near St. Peter's Basilica, and they just assumed the clergy there approved of them. It shows how deeply embedded these pagan customs were, even at the very heart of the church.
Which leads us directly to the most shocking part of all of this. The institutionalization of topsy-turvydom inside the church walls. The Feast of Fools and the Boy Bishop.
The Feast of Fools, which ran for the 12 days of Christmas, was the most extreme example of the pagan spirit just invading the sanctuary.
And we have a record from the Paris Faculty of Theology in 1445, and the list of what they were doing is just breathtakingly sacrilegious.
Priests wearing masks, dressing up as women or pimps, and dancing in the choir singing dirty songs.
They ate black puddings on the altar while the priest was saying mass. They used the smoke from burning old shoes instead of incense. They played dice on the altar.
They literally took the condemned customs of the street and moved them right into the most sacred space of the church.
And the ass, the asinus, became this central, profane figure in all the chaos.
The high point was singing the prose of the ass. The hymn was in Latin, praising the ass, but it had this ridiculous French refrain that forced the congregation to join in the absurdity. Hey, Sir Ass, come sing, pull back your lovely mouth.
But the ceremony at Beauvais took it to a whole other level.
It was pure theatrical profanity. A girl with a baby rode a real ass into the church. But the craziest part is that the mass responses, the Kyrie, the Gloria, all of it ended in a bray. And the priest, at the end of the service, instead of dismissing the congregation, had to turn around and bray 3 times.
And the people would bray back. The clergy was leading a braying mass.
They were. And the belief is that this whole ass figure is a direct descendant of that Roman servulus, the beast masking, which after centuries of being condemned, found this highly ritualized, profane way to survive inside the church itself.
And counterbalancing that chaos was the slightly older and importantly approved tradition of the boy bishop.
Right, this was centered around St. Nicholas Day, December 6th, and it was approved by the authorities, probably because boys were seen as easier to control than the rowdy, low-level clergy of the Feast of Fools. But the principle was the same, the temporary exaltation of the inferior.
So a choir boy would be elected bishop, wear the full vestments, chant the gospel, and could even go around collecting a lot of money during his short time in charge.
And it was a lot of money. Records from York in 1396 show the boy bishop collected about $77, which was a fortune back then. It just cemented this idea that during this festive season, the whole hierarchy could be turned on its head.
We've seen the solemnity, the tenderness, the farce, the profanity. Now we have to dive into the sheer magic and superstition that clung to Christmas. The folklore about luck, omens, and the supernatural.
A lot of these winter customs work on the principle of sympathetic magic. This time of year was seen as a critical hinge in time. What you did on the first day of the year was believed to determine your luck for the whole year to come.
Which is why there was so much focus on prosperity. You'd eat a big meal on New Year's Day to make sure you'd have plenty to eat all year. And you definitely had to make sure your pockets weren't empty.
And that fear of bad luck gave us customs like the British first footing on New Year's Day. The first person to cross your threshold couldn't come empty-handed. They had to bring gifts like spiced ale or shortbread.
And there was that specific superstition about the first footer. It had to be a man, because meeting a woman first was seen as universally unlucky.
And in Scotland, where the Puritans actually abolished Christmas as a religious festival, New Year's became the main event, and they preserved some really ancient folk traditions there, like fumigation.
This sounds like a powerful magic ritual, using the hide of the cow slaughtered for the winter.
It's intensely talismanic. A strip of the hide was smoked, and the fumes were seen as a powerful charm against fairies, witches, and demons. In one place, They'd pass the smoking hide around people's heads 3 times, sunwise, as a physical, fiery ward against unseen evil.
So while Midnight Mass made Christmas Eve holy, there was this contradictory pagan belief that the night was also charged with the supernatural.
The sanctity and the superstition live side by side. The most famous superstition, you find it all over Europe, is that animals, cows, dogs, horses, get the power of speech at midnight on Christmas Eve. But if you hear them, it's fatal.
And there are 2 really grim stories in the source that illustrate that danger.
The tale from Brittany is about a starving dog and cat under a table, plotting their mistress to death. The dog says if burglars break her head, it'll be a good deed. The mistress overhears them and is saved, but the implication is just chilling.
And the story from the German Alps is even more direct and terrifying. A farm servant hides in the stable to listen.
And he hears the horses planning his funeral. One horse says, "We shall have hard work to do this day week," meaning hauling a coffin. The other replies, "Yes, the farmer's servant is heavy." And the man was buried exactly 1 week later. It's a powerful warning not to mess with the supernatural on this night.
Not all the superstitions were so grim, though. There's the belief that deer kneel on Christmas night, or that bees hum a Christmas hymn.
True, but the presence of uncanny visitors on Yule night was a big deal, especially in Scandinavia. Trolls, witches, and the dead were all believed to revisit their old homes during the 12 days of Christmas.
And you had to prepare for these guests. The house had to be perfectly clean, food and ale left out on the table.
And the most unnerving detail is wiping the chairs with a white towel before you went to bed. If you found dirt on the towel in the morning, it meant a relative, fresh from the grave, had been sitting there during the night. The dead were really present.
In Greece, they feared the kallikantzaroi, these goblins or man-wolves that terrorized people for the 12 days.
And they could only be driven away by the blessing of the waters on Epiphany. When the priests came around sprinkling holy water, the kallikantzaroi would flee, crying that the priest has purified the streams and he has polluted us.
Finally, we have to look at the ultimate pagan survivals, the relics of sacrifice, starting with the Manx custom of wren hunting.
This is a truly ancient rite. The wren, the king of birds, was unlucky to kill any other time of year, which made its annual slaughter on St. Stephen's Day highly ritualized.
It was hunted down, killed, and then fastened to a long pole decorated with ribbons and paraded from house to house to collect money.
After the procession, the wren would either be solemnly buried or sometimes boiled and eaten, and a feather from the wren was considered a powerful charm against shipwreck.
And the theory is that this is a survival of an annual slaying of a sacred animal, whose body was then carried around to distribute its protective and fertilizing magic for the new year.
A ritual sacrifice converted into a folk custom. And maybe the most alarming survival, which might even hint at human sacrifice, is the Haxiehood game in Lincolnshire.
This is a massive, violent struggle between villages for a leather roll, the hood, and it's thought to have started as a fight over the head of a sacrificial bull.
But it's the ritual that happens after the game that has these dark, ancient implications. The fool, who presides over the game, is smoked over a straw fire.
He's suspended over the fire and swung back and forth until he's almost suffocated, and then he's dropped into the smoldering straw.
This really severe ritual is seen as a hint of a former human sacrifice. The victim who carries away the evils of the last year is ritually destroyed and then reborn or escapes to ensure renewal.
What's so amazing looking at all of this is the sheer complexity of it. How solemnity, innocence, broad comedy, and this raw pagan instinct all managed to coexist under the name of Christmas.
Christmas really is a microcosm of European religion. It reflects every single phase of thought, from crude magic, the beast masking, and the fire charms, all the way to the exquisite spirituality and tenderness of St. Francis.
It's not one single thing. It's more like a river that had all these tributaries flowing into it: Roman, Greek, Celtic, Teutonic.
And the reason it all endures, according to our sources, is emotional inheritance. As one writer put it, emotionally, we are hundreds of thousands of years old. Rationally, we are embryos. Many of these traditions survived because what were once serious, deadly rituals got softened over time into games for children.
And the thread that holds it all together, the serious and the silly, the pagan and the pious, is that focus on the child.
That's what mediates the tension.
So for you, as you're going through your own traditions this year, the gift-giving, the caroling, take a moment and ask yourself, where do you feel that faint echo of the pagan calends, that spirit of extravagance and jollity, that impulse to spend and celebrate? And where do you see the tender humility inspired by St. Francis's gaze into that manger, that tension between the sacred and the ridiculous, that's what makes the festival survive, ensuring that the King of Kings remains, above all else, the little brother of all mankind.